Hey guys, Shodarek here. Today's video is going over simulations and using Raidbots. This is a video I've wanted to make for a long time, and I know it's something that many people might be a bit scared to get into learning how it works because it's a bit daunting out of the gate. So, let's get started with it. First things first, you're going to need the correct add-on. Now, for downloading add-ons, I use WoW. You can also use CurseForge or however else you download add-ons. And then you're going to need the add-on SimulationCraft. What SimulationCraft does is you either have a button, or you could type /simc. So the button's up here, and let me hide my webcam. Type /simc, and it'll pop up. And then when you Control-C, it'll copy it and close the box. Next, you're going to take that, and what that does is it takes all the gear you're currently using. So whatever you're trying to sim is what I'd recommend. If you're trying to sim for raid, you should just already be in your raid build with your raid gear on, because you're going to cut down and you're going to have a baseline of what you're already using. And when you come to SimulationCraft, or to Raidbots rather, you're going to have quite a few different options here. Now, there's Top Gear, which is useful for most things that you're going to be doing. Quick Sim, and Droptimizer. These are the main three that you're ever going to use. And let me start with Quick Sim. So you can see I just paste right in here. I know a lot of people just type in their character name, but I recommend just getting SimulationCraft add-on and being able to copy-paste. And then you're going to have sim options down here at the bottom. The default that everyone does for simming, just for raiding, is a patchwork, single target, 5-minute sim. This is the default. Change the SimC version to either nightly or latest, because then if there's like hotfixes and stuff and it gets pushed through, then it'll be in your sim. And then you have a couple other options. Depending on the expansion, this can change a little bit. Right now we have like a dawn thread lining. I just set to 90%. This only matters if you're using that embellishment. And then there's consumables. SimC default can work fine, but I just have mine set to everything I will use, which is, you know, tempered potion. A high secondary stat food, doesn't matter which one because they're all the same. Flask of Alchemical Chaos. It will use an augment rune with SimC default, so I haven't touched that. And then dual wield Algari Mana Oil, as those are the weapon runes I use. Then there's raid buffs. Don't need to worry about what bleeding is. Power Infusion is actually getting a PI, but everything else I'm going to have in a given raid, everything else is selected. Down at the bottom here, there's like custom APL and SimC. You don't need to worry about any of this for what we're doing. This is for more advanced things, and maybe when we're using like overrides to sim out nerfs to a spec, or various buffs, or maybe like trinket changes. It can also be used to use a different APL, which is an action priority list, and that's how a sim knows what to cast. And just various things that can go in there like that. So yeah, that's all going to be ignored, and this is just a quick sim, so what it is you throw it in, and it's going to spit out an answer for what you're doing. And another note, you can have multiple tabs of Raidbots open at once. Very useful for whatever you're doing. Now, for example, like let's say I want to do a Droptimizer sim, and let's actually do a few of them here. Let's see. First, Manaforge Omega, and then you can change the item level that items will drop at, but I'm going to do base level, so this is whatever they drop at, and this will sim all of the heroic items for me. I'm going to turn off high precision, just to make it 4 times faster for the sake of this video. And again, this is a single target sim. If you wanted to sim for like vaguely for M+, you could try Dungeon Slice, but sims never work well for Mythic+. I don't have a recommended way to sim for Mythic+. Really, you end up just kind of following your single target sim in regards to stats, and when it comes to trinkets or any other niche things like that, using me as a resource and copying what I'm doing or what I recommend is probably just what you should do. Then I could open another one. I just did a heroic sim, so I could do another on normal. Again, instead of doing base this time, let's do champion for Art of 8. So this uses all your normal crests to upgrade to 691 minimum, and it won't use any heroic crests. And then we'll do another Droptimizer here for Mythic+. And let's go take a look at, let's see here, Mythic Plus Dungeons, and let's do a drop out of a +10. So it'll drop at 701, and this is just what you get out of +10 keys next week. And again, gonna turn off that high precision. And then one last one here for Professions-Epic. This is crafted gear. So just set it to mastery crit. That's typically what we're going to craft with, and keep it max item level at 720. That's going to be the max when you do a mythic craft. So this will sim this out as well. I will note, for a Droptimizer sim with this, it doesn't sim embellishments, but that's okay for what we're looking at. And I can come back here and see, my sims are starting to finish up on Droptimizer, but my quick sim finished. And for a quick sim, it's just going to be, this is the damage that it deals on 5 minutes. Sims vary their duration by 20%. So you can see here that when it says a 5-minute sim, by default, SimC varies fight length for each iteration to avoid overly specific results, so it varies from 240 to 360 seconds. So it's not an exactly 5-minute sim, it's anywhere in the 4 to 6 minute range, which helps differ the options and make it a little bit more useful for like raid scenarios, for example. Whereas on a specific 5-minute sim, you can end up with something like a haste breakpoint, changing some sort of cast that you get on that exact fight timer. That's why specific fight timers are typically not used. In the quick sim, you can also see a general damage breakdown. This is the average across all the sims that it runs. It doesn't run one fight. Typically, it runs 10,000 iterations of a fight. Then it's going to have all the buffs that you should have, and it will have a sample ability log, which is from one iteration, and, you can see how the opener is done and general rotation down here, plus all the buffs it adds up. Now, Quicksim only has a couple things to be used for, and a lot of it's just, like, looking at some of the more basic stuff down here, or seeing, like, your straight DPS, but we can leave that one off for now. Droptimizer is an incredibly good tool, and this lets you sim out potential upgrades. So, let me flip these around here, because this is my normal upgraded to 691. So I can see all of the best upgrades, and you can change it to relative DPS or back to percentage. And it will just sim based on what is an upgrade for you. There are some notes to this. You're going to notice that, like legs and shoulders, these are massive downgrades. And why would that be? Because I only have 4-piece on. So any piece that is going over any of my tier set pieces, this only sims 1 piece versus your current. So when it replaces a part of my tier set and loses my 4-piece but gains me nothing, they're going to show significant losses. So while this works generally for a lot of upgrades, it doesn't work for everything. And then same thing, I can click through to Heroic and you can see the upgrades here. And, eventually you can run that same thing for Mythic. For Mythic plus Dungeons, you can see pieces up to 701, how big of an upgrade they are. And when it's something like a trinket or a ring, where you do have 2 in that slot, they will actually show up down here, and you can see that it's replacing Trinket 2, specifically. So Trinket 2 on my character right now is my Pacemaker. That is what it sims better than. But you can click Show All Variations and see that it can also replace Trinket 1 and be a 3% upgrade instead of 3.2. And that's replacing Signet of the Priory. So you can see tons of upgrades here and know kind of exactly what you want to target. Plus, you can also click expected value, and what that is if you get a drop out of a dungeon, that's how much you're expected to get. So it can show you what is the best dungeon for you to run. So right now for me, it looks like Arakar would be the best option, and then Tazavesh. However, this does not separate Gambit from Streets. So you'd have to go through and look at where each piece is from. Plus, it's not including any of the tier pieces that you may need for catalyzing. If I were to have like 1 piece of the new tier on, and then do a Droptimizer, you'd also see massive results of it equipping the 2-piece. Next, we have Droptimizer for Professions. Now, this is very important. I get asked a lot about what we should be crafting early in the season, and not accounting for embellishments, this is what you're seeing as upgrades. If you craft a weapon and get a main hand, on my current gear with a 691, it is 6.2% DPS. I will also then put Ascension on it, and I would swap one of my Dawn Threads off somewhere else, and it would be slightly more than that. And then from there, I would decide what piece I can get next. And it's just, you need to look at what you have to do, because if I do a ring or a neck, then I can't do my second embellishment, which I want to get a Writhing Armor Band to buff Ascension. but they are my next best. There's an alchemy stone, but again, you can't embellish this, and there's a lot better trinket options that we saw out of Mythic Plus that I would simply use those at the item level they drop at, as opposed to a crafted one. For boots, we have the special boots out of the raid, so I wouldn't want to craft there either, because these are going to be just better. And that kind of just leaves you with bracers, and you can either do straight 1 stat, crit, mastery, whatever you need, or you could do a belt. However, our delve belt is pretty similar to a 720, because it is pretty overtuned. So you're kind of limited on options, and then depending, it can also be crafting an off-piece depending where your tier goes, but that can limit you for drops later. But the first very clear option is going to be a main hand. And again, you can click Show All Variations here, and you can see that if it is put as my offhand, then the gain in an offhand over my current offhand is only 1.2%. And that is replacing capos in my offhand. So doing it as your second craft is not really going to be better, because offhand is so much less important on Havoc than main hand. With this as well, I will mention all 4 of the weapons that we can get crafted are the exact same. The reason that there's slight difference here, and you can see, oh, like this one's doing 3,000 less DPS than this one up here. And you might be wondering, why is that? That's sim variance. Sims just have a range of variance. Due to the amount of iterations that it has, it's not going to be a perfect number. So the margin of error is about 0.1%, or about 3,500 DPS, and that's just how much it will vary on every single option, regardless. So I could sim this again, and Charge Slicer could say 210k next time. But know that all of these are the exact same, and it does not matter which one you craft, as long as you can find a crafter that can make any of them, and it's an agility weapon that you're crafting for yourself, you are good to go. Next. This is going to be the biggest section by far. Top Gear. Top Gear is typically where you can do everything that you need to do. So you can come in, you paste in from your simulationcraft add-on. Now, there is going to be a lot to go over here. One of the things that I notice anytime I'm sent sims that don't make sense and people are confused is they typically simmed in a way that I would say is just wrong. So you have an option down here to change all the enchants and gems that are on your gear. You can change your talent sets down at the bottom here, and you can change out gear pieces. The thing that's important is you need to know what simply will not be an upgrade, and if something isn't good, don't click it. Going out of your way to click options that simply would not be an upgrade is just going to make the sim take longer, show a lot more versions, and do less sims on each version of the gear set to make it less accurate. So if you know something is bad, don't sim it for the sake of clicking it because you can. And just to use that as an example here, like I know Cersei's is going to be worse. I know that this miniature roulette wheel is going to be worse. And I can click them, and you can see that the number starts growing wildly out of control until you hit your cap. And the cap depends on how many iterations you have based on your subscription rank. I do subscribe to Raidbots, so mine is pretty high. But you really don't need to sim like this. What I would recommend doing is simming in short sets and trying to work things out bit by bit. So for example, on my gear, let's say I'm trying to figure out how to optimize my stats. Currently, I have a crit fiber in. So the first thing that I could do is I can click replace existing gems and enchants, and I can scroll down and I'll go, okay, I'll replace my ring enchants, and I will replace all the fibers in my cape. Only use the top ones here, as these are the crafted ones that are significantly stronger. Ignore all these bottom precise fibers. Now, when I run this sim, you're going to see that it's going to spit out an option that is going to sim the best based off of the stats that I currently have on my gear. It's probably going to want me to swap off some versatility if I had to guess, because I am geared for high-end Mythic Plus right now on live, and I definitely had way more verse than was optimal for DPS. But I can show you a few things to work off of here. And depending how many options you take, your sim can take a significant amount of time. This one shouldn't take all too long, but we will have to wait for a second here. And this can also be a time where you go and open up your sim for something else as well, or you can always just open another tab to work on something else. Something else that I could show you while that's simming on Top Gear is you can add items into your sim. You can also upgrade items in your sim. So for example, I could come down here and look at this 681 Sail Carver, and you'll see that I can upgrade it to 691, but I can't afford to upgrade it higher. Now, in future weeks, this might matter more, where you can show all, and then you can give yourself crests to see how big an upgrade would be if you could afford it. So I could actually sim this as a 704 weapon and see how big it's going to be. But I don't have an enchant checked, and it's going to warn me here, select an enchant to avoid confusing results. So you're going to want to click an enchant, and if you don't have replace on, it will put it over the weapon because it doesn't have an enchant, but it will not replace it. So like if I click Council's Guile, it will put Council's Guile on it when it sims, but it won't replace it on this one. But when I hit replace, it will replace. So I can let this one run just to see what that weapon upgrade would be, and while I do that, I'll go back to the sim that just finished. And you can see here that it's telling me it wants me to put on haste, and it wants me to use a haste Reshii Wraps. So my character is a little bit haste starved, and previously I had crit on my Reshii Wraps and versatility enchants. But you can also see that I have this one here with a mastery fiber in, but you can see these are all very close, and variance will make this, again, even matter a little bit less because we have that around 3,000 variance per sim. And you can see even just changing one enchant to haste is showing as a 418, or sorry, a 5,356 DPS gain, and that's a little bit of it varying up, but typically you could just go with whatever sim's best when you do all of these at once. But what you could do from here is you'll have the little ellipses beside each item, and you can sim it in stat weights, quick sim, Droptimizer, or top gear. So I can hit run in top gear again, and this time it's going to have my Reshii Wrap set to haste, and it's going to have haste on my rings, because it kept everything I saved because I ran that as my sim. And then next I could say, okay, I don't want to swap these anymore, and I don't want to swap the fiber anymore, but I want to sim gems. Now, gems, I'm going to sim this wrong the first time intentionally. So, this is something that catches up a lot of people on sims as well, and why I see so many people not use gems the correct way. But you can just click, and again, I'm using versatility because of Mythic Plus for last season, not optimal for damage. But you can just click Crit Mastery or Mastery Crit, and then, you know, one of each main stat. So I can click like this, and it's going to sim Crit Mastery, Haste Crit, Mastery Crit, and Verse Crit. But you'll see over here, there's a only max gem colors, and you'll also see that despite the fact that I have a lot of things clicked here, it's only saying there's 5 combinations. Now the reason for that, and this sim should be very quick, is because it's only simming with all of your gems as that single gem type. Now, it used to work different in Top Gear. It used to sim every combination of gems that there could be, but the numbers got absolutely out of control when it simmed that way, so it was changed. And what you can see here is weird. No matter what the setup is, they're all downgrades. Now, there's a reason that these are all downgrades. It's because, in this case, it's not using all 4 gem colors, where I am using all 4 gem colors on my current gear set. The correct way to sim gems is, when you're on this page, you need to have your Culminating Blasphemite clicked, you need to click Always Use, and you need to click Only Max Colors. What this means is it will always use the maximum amount of colors. So it will use the 4 different colors that you have. And then from there, it will fill the remainder with each type. So now when I run the sim, we're going to see something a little bit different. There's still only going to be 5 combinations, but every single sim will include one of every color of gem, and then the rest of the gems are filled in with each different stat type. This is never the fully correct setup or optimal, but it's close enough and it works for what it needs to do. This is how you should always sim because it will always be ahead, and you can see here that on my gear it's showing as a little bit of an upgrade to swap to Crit Mastery, as opposed to using the gems that I'm currently using, which are Versatility. So again, I can always click in and do another top gear sim from this. So just make sure you're always using that Culminating Blasphemite in one of each gem color, and if you don't sim it this way, it's going to tell you to do something else, and it will be wrong, but it's user error. So now, if you've optimized your gems, and because they're so minor, just take them out. Because having those in is going to multiply all of the iterations of everything you're doing by 5. And when you start clicking a bunch of different options, that's going to really run the numbers out of control quickly. And as you can see here, now it's trying to sim 544 combinations. And if I take off the enchants, that cuts down. So yeah, just keep your gems unchecked. Make sure you always use one of each color. And if you ever want to find out what's optimal to use, it's typically going to be crit mastery or mastery crit. And it's minor enough each way that it doesn't really matter. Now, I did mention the fiber and the cloak earlier, and I made a video on this recently. I do recommend getting one of every type of these crafted. You probably don't need versatility, to be honest. That one shouldn't ever really be used, but you can get one of every type crafted, and then you can always just run a sim whenever you want and see if your stats will want you to change your cloak. The reason this is important is if your stats are off and your character just needs a bit more haste or a bit more mastery as opposed to crit, this is a way that you can swap it entirely free and instantly, and just change your stats around, and shifting 1700 stats for free. And a lot of the time, when we optimize gear around jewelry, that's typically what we're doing, is we're just changing where our stats are going, even if we're not getting more of them. So this is something that's really nice, because it can open up other gear to be upgrades. Let me use an example where if I had gotten the ring out of Dawnbreaker, which is this one here, the Devout Zealot's ring. Let me add one. And let me add it to the item level I would have been using at, which would have been top of veteran track, 691, which is just the max that you can do with your weathered crests. So I'll add the ring, and then I'm going to want to add gems to the ring. So you add max sockets and unclick the original. They're using haste, so I'm going to click haste. Now, I actually will need to use max colors, so I will need to add all these gems back in. And this will get a little bit sloppy because of that. For the sake of it, we'll swap this to also see if crit will be an upgrade. And because Jaster's Diamond is simply better than Ring of Perpetual Conflict, I can hit lock on it, and you'll see the combinations will cut in half. Because it's no longer going to try simming iterations of just these two rings. Jaster's Diamond will always be used when it's locked. And you have the same functionality on trinkets. If I click like Eye of Kazan and then lock Signet, it will always sim with Signet and only do one or the other of the other two. And you can only lock one trinket or ring at a time. Now, I have my ring selected. I have all the gems selected, so it will gem it. It will put an enchant on the ring. And what I'm simming here basically is, what's better? Ring of Perpetual Conflict with critical strike and mastery, or the critical haste ring, which is 7 item levels higher, so it has more stats on it. Now, Sims would likely say that this would be a downgrade unless you sim correctly, but it is an upgrade. You just may require changing your stats around somewhere else. And the fact is, I'm going to be shifting this mastery into a little bit more crit and a little less haste, which is going to be too much haste for my character. But if you remember, it told me I wanted the haste fiber in my cloak before. So, now I have it simming all the different iterations of that. I'm going to unclick versatility because I know versatility is not an upgrade. And again, you can see my combination amount comes down. So I'm going to sim it just like this. And this is to kind of minimize the amount of iterations I'm getting. And let's do this one as high precision. All right. That sim took a long time, so I skipped forward, so I wasn't sitting here for 4 minutes. That'll happen when you have a lot of iterations, and when I scroll down here, you're going to see that I simply just have a lot. Now, you're going to see that, you can see just, if it only swaps the fiber, there's still downgrades, because it wants more haste. But, up here, at the top, 11,000 DPS gain. If I would have gotten this ring, then this would have been a gain that I would have seen, compared to my current gear. And what it's doing is, it's doing 1 enchant of haste and 1 to crit. So it swapped one of these to crit. The gems swapped to mastery crit from crit mastery. And it was previously mastery on this ring as opposed to haste. I also then had the Reshii Wraps swap over to the mastery gem as opposed to the haste gem, and that sims ahead because you're getting the haste on the ring now. So this is how just changing your stats around will shift everything around, but because you get a little bit more item level and more overall stats, it's going to be an upgrade. Another way that you can kind of tell when something is going to be an upgrade is, now I could take this sim, and I could do it as a stat weight sim. Now, stat weights is very mentioned here, strongly advised against using, because Top Gear and Droptimizer are simply just easier ways to deal with information. However, if you have a good idea of what you're doing, there are some use cases for stat weights. So I'll talk about those really quickly right now. What I typically will use stat weights for is if I need a clear example of exactly what might be an upgrade, so I know what I'm looking for in a Top Gear sim, so I don't have to select all the options, then I want to know what my stat weights are looking like. Now, in AoE, these can have massive, massive swings. The problem with it in AoE is the way stat weights works is it adds a set amount of each stat, and sees what the DPS gain is per stat, and then that's what gives you the per stat damage value. But haste, for example, in an AoE sim, will change around when some abilities are used, and it might greatly increase or even decrease the damage based on it not lining up as well or lining up better into, like, AoE and Dungeon Slice. So, outside of single target, this is not really the best tool to use, but in single target you can see right now that currently Mastery is slightly ahead of haste, which is slightly ahead of crit, and that is slightly ahead of versatility. This is because my stats are more or less optimized, and in my current gear, I'm just missing a little bit of mastery. So ideally, I'd be able to swap slight amounts of verse and crit into more mastery, and maybe a little bit of haste to get these about equal. But if I take what my original sim was, I'm going to see different stat weights. And again, this is my current character. This will be with, you know, not using that ring upgraded that I put into Top Gear, so without that crit haste ring, with the versatility and chance on my rings, with the crit fiber in my cloak. And when I come back and look at this, you're going to see that likely crit is going to be my bottom stat. Actually, versatility should be pretty low as well, but mastery and haste will be higher, so the gaps should be bigger here. So you can see haste is a lot more wanted on this sim, as it's just missing that haste that the other sim had. And that's why it wants me to use a haste fiber. And again, an upside to having all these fibers available is it's as simple as coming, left-clicking, and just like that, I now have 1700 more haste. And my haste problem is more or less solved for now. Now, this doesn't entirely cover everything with Top Gear, but it is a good example of what this tool can do. Another thing, and this one is very important, is I mentioned on Droptimizer that it does not actually do embellishments. So I could take one of these Everforged Warglaves, and let's say I want to add that. And then it's 720 item level for max. So I'm going to click at 720 item level. And now it's warning me, oh sorry, it did crit first instead of crit mastery. So let me do that again. I'm going to uncheck all these. I'm going to check which one is crit mastery, and I want that to be main hand. But putting that in my main hand means this is now going to sim a 720 Warglaive in my main hand, and the Gladius will not be used at all. What I want to do is I also want to click the Gladius on Capo's side. So now it will try to sim these against each other. It's also saying that this is too expensive because I don't have a ethereal crest for it, but you can always come in and just add ethereal crests and it'll let it work. Always read the incomplete. Now it's saying, hey, main hand has a mix of unenchanted. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not doing anything with gems or the fibers, so I can go uncheck all those. And same with these. And then let me click into Stonebound Odyssey and Cancel's Guile, as those are our top enchants, and I'll sim with both types on both weapons. And now we're simming with a 720 Warglaive main hand. But I actually want to sim this with an embellishment. Ascension. And now it's telling me you can't do this because you have too many embellishments. The reason for that is I have 2 embellishments on other items, but you can always come up here and hit remove embellishment. And now it will sim with a version without the embellishment. As such, I can also go down here and recraft this to have Writhing Armor Banding, which will double the value of Ascension as opposed to just the Writhing Armor Band. Now, I don't have a ton of options selected because I took off all my gems and fibers, so I have 32 combinations, and I'm going to get a clear example of what I'm going for. After this sim is where I would look to re-optimize stats again, as opposed to doing it all in one, where you could, but if you have all of that clicked, your iterations is now 512, and you're going to have a million options with a million icons popping up, confusing your sim results. And that's simply something that you don't need. So, I'm going to sim it as it is now, and we'll send it through. I'm going to take off high precision to speed this up, and I will skip to the end of this sim in the video. Alright, the sim has completed. So, scrolling down again, this was a sim for pretty much if I were to craft a 720 Warglaive and make Ascendants for raiding. As such, it is now telling me the weapon's an upgrade. Capos is still the better offhand, despite the fact it's 7 item levels lower, and it still wants 1 each of Council's Guile and Stonebound Artistry. It has taken the embellishment off of my main hand, because it wants to use Ascendants, and it has taken Dawn Thread lining off of my boots and used Writhing Armor Band. Now I can sit here and collect show gem and enchant variants. This is just really going to show the differences in enchants. And you can see here, all it's doing is swapping around mastery and crit enchants. This does literally nothing, so this difference is just in sim variants. Again, right here, this is when it's using Dawn Thread lining, as opposed to using the doubling of Nerubian Embellish. And it's actually very similar, so you could use Dawn Thread if you want, or you can use Ascension, but you can't put Dawn Thread on a weapon, so it will have to be Ascension there either way. Coming down a bit further, we'll see when it's doing double mastery and double crit, and you can see that's a little bit behind because it's opting a little too much into a single stat. Now, if I look all the way down, and what I've done here is I've clicked this top option, so everything is relative to the top option. Now I can see that it is a 12k downgrade to use the 691 weapon as my offhand as opposed to Capos. Capos is just stronger because of the proc being more effective, but with higher item level eventually it would get replaced. And if I go down even further, you can see as soon as I take off that Warglaive, it is a 200,000 DPS loss. That's just simply how much damage you're going to be losing as soon as you take off the Warglaive, and all of the sims down here with a red dot are run with very small amounts of simulations, so there's a lot of variance on them all. Now, the reasoning is it doesn't really matter what any of these sims say because they're all so much worse that you should never be looking at them as options. So when it comes down to it, you're going to, be swapping to a Warglaive, which is going to be at least 186k DPS at worst, which is 5.6%, and at absolute best up to 6.3%, which is 210k DPS. Then from there, you can click in, go to top gear again, and if you want to optimize stats from here, this is where you can just do a sim where you're not doing all the weapon swaps or anything else. You already have all of that dealt with, and then you're going to come down here and you'll go, okay, let me do my gems again, let me swap around my fibers, and let me swap around my enchants. Now again, you really don't need to click versatility because it's just not going to be better, and you don't need to do the gems either, so for the sake of it, I'm not going to sim them on mine, but I will swap around the weapon enchants and the ring and fibers between non-verse, and just have those swapped now. Come down to the bottom, find top gear again. And now you're taking that sim that you did the gear upgrades on and optimizing the stats from it. And once this is done, to see that you've done a good job, you're going to want to run this into stat weights. Alright, the simulation has completed, and this is with the stats getting optimized. Now it's just pushing crit mastery. The gems are being kept as is, which is my current verse gems, and the Reshii Wraps is changed back to haste for one reason or another. From here, what you can do is check that you have optimized your stats correctly. Now that's going to be one thing here, which is I'm going to take this and run it as a stat weight sim. At the same time, however, I'm going to copy this and let this run for stat weights, and I'm going to run another Droptimizer for Mythic Plus. The reason that I'm doing this is I can compare this to the previous sim, where this was all done for items at 701 item level. So I'm going to run this at Mythic 10, 701, base level, no upgrades. And we're going to be able to compare these sims after once I have that weapon craft done. When I come back to stat weights, you can see again, crit, mastery, haste, and verse are all pretty similar. I do want a little bit less verse, and if I'd simmed for the gems and optimized those, they wouldn't be using versatility gems. That would bring that more in line, and have a little bit more crit. more or less, this is pretty optimal. My stats are optimized well enough, and you can see here, because they're all pretty close, that we've done a good job. If you had, for example, it was showing critical strike or mastery up at like 50 and every other stat around 43, you want more of that stat that it's showing at the top. And that's just how it is. So that can give you a clear example of what exactly you should look for in your sim and what you should be doing. From there, we can look at the Droptimizer sim, and I'm just going to skip a little bit forward to when this completes. The sim is completed for the other Droptimizer for Mythic dungeons, and now we have the two different ones that we can compare. This first one was, again, before we had actually done the weapon craft, and this one is after. So you can see very clear differences. First thing that you're going to notice is there's going to be differences in upgrades outside of the weapon. So you can see, like, previously, weapon was very high, 2%, 2%, 2.1, 1.9. On this one, those have dropped significantly to 0.4. That's because now they're going into the offhand slot. They're not better than the main hand, they're going down to weapon slot 2. So when I scroll down to find it, you can see they're showing as offhand. Something else you might notice now is Taking Sack of Terror has dropped significantly. Previously, not showing all variations, previously, Taking Sack of Terror was 106k DPS, 3.2%. That is dropped to 87k, which is 2.4%. Part of that is relative DPS drop, as our overall sim has increased a lot. The other part is the sim literally went down by 20k DPS. Why that is Taking Sack is a mastery-based trinket, not main stat, it is secondary stat, which has significantly less value, and it's on flat damage. As we gain more damage in our character, the relative damage value of this goes down, and the value of the main stat that we're losing goes up. And that's why Arakar Sackbrood now is only 37k behind, when previously it was 50k behind. As you get more gear, this will continue to shift, and this is kind of something that shows relative shifting of different components that might seem unrelated to you, but do matter in sims, and this is why simming your character is simply so important. Because depending on where your gearing is at on your character, answers can be incredibly different between characters, and I can't answer every question for you guys, unfortunately. So I did want to really just kind of come through and make this video and give some good examples on exactly how simming works between getting the SimulationCraft add-on and actually using Raidbots. That sums up about everything that I did want to go over. This video ended up being significantly longer than I planned on it being, so I do apologize for how long this is. My bad. But simming is unfortunately a little bit complex to do correctly, and learning to do it correctly and use top gear effectively is really the #1 tool that I would recommend for utilizing Raidbots, and it makes a significant difference on your knowledge on what you need to do for gearing. So when we say sim yourself, this is what we're talking about, this is why it's so important, and this is why I don't know the answers for your character, because a simple difference of a piece of gear here and there can change all the answers. That's everything for today. If this helped, please leave a comment below and let me know. Maybe leave a like on the video. And if you like this kind of content and want to learn more about World of Warcraft in general, or specifically Havoc Demon Hunter, please follow my channel. Thanks, and have a good night.